Now, before we start, in last session we had some questions which were not answered properly. So I will try to go into those questions today, and then we will continue the topic today. The first of the question is about role of Smritsagarasa in myalgia by Dr. Shashidhar Kaje and Dr. Ravishankar Khatri. Now, Smritsagarasa is indicated in all Kevala Vataganya Vyadhis, and in case of myalgia where Kevala Vata Lakshanas are there, Smritsagarasa can be prescribed. And I have not suggested Smritsagarasa as the sole treatment for fibromyalgia. It's suggested only as one of the options of the treatment and a supportive treatment in such conditions. So in selective cases where you have Kevala Vata Lakshana, it could be given. Moreover, fibromyalgia also has a stress component, and in those patients who have stress as a phenomena, Smritsagarasa could be prescribed. Then another question was, which of these conditions Ruksha Sweda helps? Now, Ruksha Sweda is preferably useful only in Kapaja Shodha Lakshanas. Majority of the patients with the myalgia and muscular disorders would have either a Vata Lakshana or Pitta Lakshana, and hence the role of Ruksha Sweda in such conditions are relatively lesser. Only in vascular edema conditions Ruksha Sweda can be prescribed. Or in Amavata, which we are going to discuss today, it could be prescribed. Then the third question was about, can ossification in muscles be considered as a Asti Avarta Vayu by Dr. Sumarani. I think that kind of a conclusion is not necessary, because after all, the hardening of the muscles in case of myositis ossificans is not really a ossification. It's not the Asti Dhatu. It's a Vata Vikriti where the muscle tissue becomes hardened. The Kathanya occurring due to the Vata Vikara is the pathology there. So hence I think to extend it as a Asti Avarta Vata would be not necessary, because after all it's an incurable condition. As it may be it may be argued in any way. Then another question was, adhesive capsulitis of shoulder, how can it be managed? I think we have already discussed that issue, like it becomes incurable with or cannot be managed with medical treatment. You may need to have an interventional treatment, surgical treatment also may be necessary. Symptoms of pain could be relieved in capsulitis conditions. That's what we have already discussed there in the last session. Then explain periodic paralysis and aretic management by Dr. Gopal Krishnayak. Periodic paralysis is a rare condition, and the most common cause is hypokalemia, and hypokalemia we have referred to. The other causes of periodic paralysis like genetic pathologies are extremely rare. Hypokalemia, of course, potassium supplement has to be given, and along with that we have already referred to Ashwagandha Rishta, Ekangavira, such drugs could be given. Pushkaram Punarnava could be another of the drug which could be prescribed there. Then another question was the reason of cramps at bedtime, bedtime only, possible diagnosis by Dr. Abha and the Jhansi Glover. Now, when the patient has cramps at bedtime, it's most of the times it's due to the varicosities. Stasis of the blood flow there would be the cause there. Then, and that's what we have already referred to. Varicosities and the complications of the varicosities we have discussed. Then some people get muscle cramps only at bedtime. What may be the reason? I think the same question. Then, is there any connection between high ESR and muscle pain? Of course, high ESR and muscle pain has a direct relationship in autoimmune conditions like lupus or myositis conditions. All chronic inflammatory conditions, of course, ESR is one of the criteria to suggest about the possible severity of the inflammation. Then kindly let us know the management of GB syndrome. Of course, we have not discussed the total management of the GB syndrome, because after all GB syndrome is a neurological disorder, and what we were discussing last session was about the muscular complications of the neurological pathology. So in the acute GB syndrome status, the management will be on the status of neurological pathology, usually considered this as Adharanga Vata. But later, when the muscular atrophy tends to occur, that's a domain of the muscular diseases. So we have referred to that part, like the Ekangavira, Ashwagandha Rishta, Abhyartatapya, Digodanti, that Brahmana Aushadis which can be given in muscular atrophy. are the other options which we have referred to. Then another of the question is mostly patients of diabetic complaints of neuropathy symptoms are a later stage of complication, but our text described such symptoms in the Pura Rupa. How this is possible? I think this kind of a question is a very common question. The issue is diagnosis of diabetes mellitus is now based upon the issue of hyperglycemia. We diagnose the diabetes mellitus based upon the blood sugar level. Sushruta or Charaka have not diagnosed Madhumeha or Prameha based upon that assessment of the sugar, rather the Prakarsha Prameha Lakshanas, like the abnormalities which could be seen in the urine. And naturally, that cutoff point to make the diagnosis would be different. When you say the cutoff point of making the diagnosis based upon the sugar level and a clinical manifestation, these are two different issues, and it is this kind of an issue is true for many other diseases. The same issue is true, like a Pura Rupa, which is considered by text as a Pura Rupa, now could be considered as a complication, or vice versa, Lakshanas, and these kinds of issues need not be confused. Then what can be the best management of spastic cerebral palsy in children according to you, sir? Now I think the spastic cerebral palsy, we have referred to that issue, the muscle pathologies, and my prescription usually is Ekangavira Sarsudarishta is the usual prescription along with the physiotherapy. I have referred to that issue. Then what is the role of Chandraprabha in neuromuscular disorders? Chandraprabha is a Rasayana Aushadhi, and in those conditions where there is a Dhatukshay Lakshana, Chandraprabha can be safely prescribed. Then Dr. Sridevi has suggested we want to have a CME on current situation on coronavirus treatment. I think already there is a lot of confusion, and I don't want to add some more confusion to that issue. But at least one sentence is all that what we see about the coronavirus now is COVID virus is somewhat a confusion, and a lot of madness is there, and I think I will not go beyond into the complications of that issue. Maybe if at all you want to have more opinion, we can think of that maybe in due course of time. I think I have answered many of those questions which were raised in the last session. Now let me start with today's presentation. The today's issue is about the bones. We have already discussed about the muscle pathology. Today we will refer to the diseases of the bones and the joints. Now with the bones, I am not again going into the physiology of the bones as such, but a bit about the content of the bone. The content of the bone primarily is a collagen tissue. It's a soft tissue, collagen tissue as such, and over the collagen tissue there will be deposition of the crystals, calcium crystals. That process is called as mineralization process. So you will have the crystals deposited over the network of collagen tissue. That becomes a hardened structure, and these mineralized collagen fibers are organized in such a way that they form a Haversian system that forms the bone. So primarily all that point which we are going to refer to is a bone has the calcium content in high quantities, but this calcium is not a stable calcium. There is a continuous exchange of the calcium between the bone and the serum. The exchange is regulated by the phosphatase enzymes, as well as it's regulated by the other factors like the parathyroid hormone and vitamin D are other factors which regulate the absorption and excretion of the calcium. All that point which I would like to make out is serum calcium level is not a reflection of the status of the bone. There is a continuous exchange, and this exchange would be is not reflecting the status of or the concentration of the calcium in the bone, because if there is more calcium released from the bone, the serum calcium level will be higher. So when the serum calcium level is higher, doesn't mean that the calcium content of the bone is normal, or vice versa. That's all the point which you have to remember before we go into the primary diseases of the bones. Now let me start with the diseases of the bones, and the first of the thing is disorders of bone mineralization, diseases where the formation of the bone is abnormal, and among them the most common is the rickets. Rickets is one of them. And the rickets are not only the deficiency of the calcium. There could be many varieties of the rickets. Either it could be nutritional rickets, where there is a real deficiency of the dietary factors, either of the calcium. Congenital rickets, where there could be some genetic abnormality also. Rickets of prematurity, that's and because the child was born in a premature condition, there is a tendency for the rickets. Or it could be a vitamin D resistance, where there could be a metabolic pathology. We will not go into much of that. Neoplastic rickets, children who have some other neoplastic condition, they tend to develop rickets. Hypophosphatemic rickets or drug-induced rickets. So the type of the rickets are many. Important is from the management point of view, genetic, that's congenital rickets and vitamin D resistance rickets, neoplastic rickets, they are difficult to be treated, whereas in other conditions they can be treated. Of course, from the clinical point of view, majority of the patients whom we see are of the nutritional rickets type. Now, clinical symptoms of rickets are quite characteristically. The first of the thing is there will be delayed milestones of development, particularly the motor activity will be reduced. Muscles will be hypotonic, the tone of the muscles will be lesser. The wrists, the growth of the bone is something odd, where the epiphyseal end of the bones, they seem to be widened and very commonly seen in the wrists as such. And then it results in a progressive bowing of the long bones. The long bones, they can become bent as such. Then you will have the classical clinical signs of rachitic rosary. I will show you some of those examples. Then the classic Harrison sulcus, which is due to the same issue, like the bone becoming bent, will produce the typical abnormalities. Violin case deformity of the chest, then late closure of the anterior fontanelle, then parietal and frontal bossing as such, craniotabs, craniosynostosis, or delay in teeth eruption, or a hypoplasia of the body as such, and enamel hypoplasia, decreased bone mineral density, and myopathy with the normal deep tendon reflexes. When you examine, the reflexes may be normal, but the muscles are not functioning properly. Propensity for infections, where the child is more prone to develop the infections. These are the common set of clinical symptoms of the rickets as such. Now, what I mean by this, enlarged wrist is where I think you can see over the screen the abnormality of the epiphyseal ends of the bones, where they have become widened. Rickety rosary is due to the costochondral junctions becoming very prominent, and hence looks like a rosary hanging over the body. So chest would show you a linear prominences over the area. Or it could be the Harrison sulcus, that's a depression seen over the chest when the child is kept in an erect posture. Or there could be a widening of the lower portion of the thorax and the abdomen, which gives the violin case chest abnormality. I think that's all about the description which we of the words which we have referred to. Then craniotabs are abnormalities of the skull shape, where there could be irregular bulging over the skull, and different shapes of that, different possible shapes of the craniotabs. I think you can see over the screen. It could be of any of that. The head shape would be abnormal, either it could be on the frontal side or parietal side, or maybe the posterior segment. The head shape would be abnormal. In total, the appearance of a rickety child would be very classical, like there will be a protruding forehead, then there would be in general the size of the head is larger than the usual. It looks quite odd. Linear growth of the body is lesser, and the chest shape would be something abnormal, where there is a sulcus, and hence it's also called a pigeon shaped chest. The depressed ribs would be depressed as such. So the appearance is very classical, and the evidence of bones becoming bent can be made out with the X-rays. So confirmation of the rickets mainly is done by clinical signs. Now, from Ayurvedic point of view, Kashyapa Samhita has described the pathology very clearly, almost in the same manner as Pakka Roga, and the description is Bala Samvatsara Padabhyam Yona Gacchati, where there is a motor growth is reduced, the milestones of the growth are reduced, and the child is not able to walk even after a year. And the cause of Pakka is also considered as different types of the Pakka are described in the text. Either it could be Garbhini Matratah, it could be due to the abnormality of the nourishment related to the mother, or it could be even due to the Garbhajam, either it could be Vyadhi Sambhavam, it could be due to the other diseases which are produced in the body, and it could be Kshiradam, it could be the abnormality of the milk contents, the nourishment criteria. So almost a total description of the rickets are described in the Kashyapa Samhita, and it's considered as a Pakkaroga. Main description in case of the Pakkaroga are the rickets would be Aragyavardhini, Kumariyasava or Aravindasava. Aravindasava, when the child is emaciated but appetite is somewhat moderately good. Kumariyasava is when the appetite is markedly reduced, when there is a Agnimandya Lakshana, it's the Kumariyasava is prescribed. And along with that, another important part of the management would be the physical exercises. Exercises of any sort, either it could be physiotherapy or it could be any of the sort. Of course, one of the common treatment would be some oil massage. Usually, I prefer to use simple Tila Taila for the massage. Advise the patient's party to apply and then manage that. But Kashyapa Samhita has even suggested about an instrument, Pakkarataka, a three-wheeler like structure which could be helping to child to move about. Now, of course, physiotherapy setups would have lots of such instruments which can facilitate. So that's in brief as about the management of the rickets with the Ayurvedic management. With the Ayurvedic management, definitely we can show the improvement clinically by shifting the growth chart of the child. Now, growth chart of the child can be seen in every mother and child protection card or Thai card which is given by the government now, and there you can plot the gain of weight and height as well as the physical measurements over there. And a child which comes under the green zone is considered to be having a normal nourishment, and the rickets children would be usually tending towards the red zone. With our treatment like Aragyavardhini Kumariyasava, at least within 3 to 4 months, there can be a significant shift from the red zone towards the green zone, and except for those genetic pathologies or some of those resistant vitamin, these enzyme abnormality conditions, almost nutritional ricket conditions can be effectively managed with only these treatments without other supplementation. Rarely a few of the patients where there is a real malnourishment, like patients coming from extremely poor classes, where the dietary support is not sufficient, or mother's milk is somewhat is not sufficient, and so on. In such conditions, there may be a need for supplementing of either vitamin D or calcium. Now, about vitamin D, which is very popularly prescribed. Now, most of the children are prescribed as prophylactically. Even the children who have otherwise normal growth are prescribed with vitamin D. So, I think we need to have some clear idea about that vitamin D deficiency and myths about that. As per the data which is presented throughout the globe now, the vitamin D deficiency is considered as a pandemic. It's also named as a pandemic condition, and the incidence is considered to be very high in the Asian countries. I think you can make out that in the Asian countries and some parts of Africa or Southern America and maybe certain areas as such. So geographic distribution of the vitamin D deficiency is considered, and now the global interest is about the Asian countries. India and related countries are the areas where the people are very much focused over the vitamin D deficiency. A bit about the certain facts about the vitamin D deficiency. I think I am not going beyond the topic, but I think we have to refer to that issue also. The vitamin D standard, the reference range, ideally is considered as 25 to 30 nanograms per ml. And this was initially considered as the standard by almost all the physicians throughout the globe. And the deficiency deficiency is getting reduced through the year now. This vitamin D is not directly measured in the body. Instead, the serum will be testing 25-OXD enzyme, and the level of 25 OHD is gradually increasing year by year, and the incidence of the deficiency is rather getting somewhat reduced as such in the present day situation. It could be due to the supplementation, rather the level of vitamin D is increasing rather. Now vitamin D is rather many times it is believed or many times it is claimed as a solution for all the problems. It is one of the general tonics which are given and supposed to be helpful in reducing many of the diseases. In the present day situation, in the COVID conditions also, there is some people are prescribing vitamin D as one of the prophylaxis or maybe something like improving the immunology and so on. So the issues are a bit confusing. But the fact is, level of vitamin D when it is beyond a certain limit is not going to help. Rather, it can produce the disease conditions which are established as hypervitaminosis D. Clinical symptoms of the hypervitaminosis are fatigue, loss of appetite, weight loss, excessive thirst, excessive urination, dehydration, constipation, irritability, ringing of the ear, muscle weakness, nausea, dizziness, confusion and so on. Vague symptoms which are often seen due to the chronic hypervitaminosis. But if the hypervitaminosis is acute, where suddenly the dose is high and very high, in that condition there could be more acute problems like kidney stones, kidney damage, even renal failure could be precipitated, and even there could be bone loss. See, this is an important thing. Vitamin D in a moderate dose helps in resurrection of the bone, but when it is in excess, it can result in a loss of the bone content. It also can result in calcification of the arteries and soft tissues. So hypervitaminosis is also harmful. Rather, vitamin D deficiency is not as harmful as hypervitaminosis. That's the point. Now, usually most of the times the practitioners throughout maybe general prescriptions would not be considering this issue, and most of the times vitamin D is overprescribed. Incidence of the hypervitaminosis is now increasing. So I am just referring to a few of the publications which are published in recent years, where the incidence of hypervitaminosis is reported both in India as well as in the global status as such. Just for the reference, I have just referred to those articles. Those who are interested can refer to these articles and then make out the impression. Now some interesting story about that hypervitaminosis and so on. Now there is again I refer to one of the very popular article in a very established journal, the Medscape, where the reference is here in the last line. The article title itself, now in this slide whatever you see, all the sentences are copied from that article. I have not added any of my word or sentence. Only thing is I have added some colors to these sentences in the article. I have picked up some of the articles. Title of the article: The Man Who Sold America on Vitamin D and Profited in the Process. The story is this Michael Holick, who is an endocrinologist and very famous and established person. He has written a huge number of articles and very impressive articles about the incidence of vitamin D hypovitaminosis throughout the globe, because he stated, along with that endocrinology unit as such, a group of them maybe suggested that the level of this vitamin D, optimum level of vitamin D should be higher, like 30 to 60 nanograms as such. Considering that level, if you assess the vitamin D level throughout the globe, naturally a large number of people would be showing a hypovitaminosis, like vitamin D deficiency levels. They can be categorized as vitamin D levels. In general, in reality, vitamin D is produced spontaneously in the body when you get exposed to sunlight. And in India, where sunlight is in plenty, and if you are exposed to sunlight even for about 45 minutes in a day, you would have sufficient vitamin D provided in the body. Deficiency would occur only in very few conditions where there is a real deficiency in the diet. and the number would be very less. But if you go by the criteria of enhanced vitamin D level, there will be a large number of people who can be categorized as a vitamin D deficiency. This creates a market for both testing of vitamin D as well as providing the vitamin D. So laboratories as well as pharmacies who are benefited, they had contributed directly to this person $936 million in the supplement market and $365 million worth of the tests. They had earned that, and their contribution was quite huge to the Michael Halick as such. This was identified, and the ethical issues were raised, and a huge number of articles were written against this kind of practice. And I have selected one of the sentences in some of those issues which were discussed, like the drug companies can sell fear but they can't sell sunlight, so there is no promotion of the sun's health benefits. So this issue was somewhat lot of halagulla was there. And one of the sentence, last sentence, concluding sentence by that ethical groups who had criticized the issue of raising the optimum level of vitamin D. The last sentence was, it is very hard to change the habits, and the medical community is not much different than the rest of the world, and we get into the facts. But practice of suggesting vitamin D tests as well as prescribing vitamin D, it's continuing in such a way that there is rather a pandemic of hypervitaminosis. From the clinical point of view, this is an important issue. We will get a large number of patients of that category where the patients are over-prescribed with vitamin D. It happens even in adults, it's not only in children. Now, I think in the last session also we have referred the issue about statin and statin over-prescription in the earlier issues. And a vitamin D deficiency produced related to the statin as well as these kind of exaggerated vitamin D levels, and which even the standard labs would suggest. See, now the standard labs would always suggest the level, optimum vitamin level as a 40 to 30 nanograms. Now after all these issues, and 150 nanogram is considered as a toxic level, and 31 to 39 nanogram is considered as insufficient level. ICMR in Indian standards, that second table which you see in the green color, is recognized by the ICMR, where the levels suggested are almost the same, where the optimal is considered in the same category of 40 to 80 as the optimum level, and 60 to 100 is considered as therapeutic, the suggested therapeutic, and most of the patients who are prescribed and maintained at this level would have the symptoms of fatigue, general debility and so on. Simply discontinuing or reducing the dose of vitamin D can produce a significant change in that outcome. Now, at the end of all that confusion, now very recently, there is a standard prescribed by the Endocrine Society has given a new guideline, and this guideline is very interesting. The less than 20 nanogram is considered as deficiency, no dispute about that. Then 30 to 100 nanograms as considered safe, but to satisfy the other group, I think you can see the color, a green color which is extending beyond these ranges, a red color which is extending beyond these ranges. So these were given, suggested as the standard. So I have copied it directly from the sources, authentic sources, and all that. My purpose of referring to this issue is just to give an idea of what we are facing in the present day situation, claiming as scientific medicine, ethical medicine and so on, and particularly for Ayurvedic people who are often criticized, like there are lots of criticisms. We should be aware of the present situation over that, not beyond that. I think we will stop at that level. Now, the guidance about the vitamin D in the era of COVID, just the very present day situation, even with all that background, very recently, on April 16th, a group of 6 organizations, they suggested that vitamin D is very safe when taken at reasonable dosages and is important for musculoskeletal health. and levels are likely to decline as individuals reduce outside activity during the pandemic. Because of the lockdown, people will not go into sunlight, and hence there is a need to prescribe vitamin D in larger quantities. This is recommended by a group of the societies. But in the same article, you have another sentence. All that I have picked up 2 sentences. I have given the color. That's all. I have not changed even a single letter from the sentence. The current data does not provide any evidence that vitamin D supplementation will help in prevention to treat COVID-19 infection. However, guidance does not preclude further study of potential effects of vitamin D over COVID-19. That's the joint statement which is said. Now, this again to highlight what is the scientific asset. Then there are lots of other myths about vitamin D deficiency in India. If you read the articles, lots of that, there is lots of myths about that. It is often claimed like the dark skin of Indians, or maybe the people who have dark skin in the Asian subcontinent, they have a higher resistance to the sun's shine, and hence even if there is sunshine, they cannot synthesize vitamin D. This also is not true. We have that dark skin because we are meant to expose to the sunlight. So fair, I think lots of movement about that fair color and so on also. That fair skin is not normal for our generation as such. Then there is a claim that there is a genetic trend in the sense, on an average, vitamin D level in the Asian subcontinent is lesser than the vitamin D level in the Western community. The reason is again simple. There is no need to have a higher vitamin D level in those areas where you have bright sunlight, whereas in those areas where the sunlight is scarce, body needs to have more vitamin D, and hence physiologically the level is higher in those areas, whereas the level is lesser in such areas where the sunlight is bright. Then vegetarian diet is considered to be one of the causes for vitamin D deficiency. That's also not true. Lots of vegetarian food would have plenty of vitamin D, and more than the food asset, it's the sunlight which makes the endogenous changes, and the major component of the vitamin D is synthesized in the body. The dietary supplement is of a relatively lesser issue. So milk not fortified, tea coffee consumption is another issue. Chapati flour which is deficient in vitamin D are some of the claimed causes of vitamin D deficiency. It was also then suggested like the practice of wearing burqa would be one of the factors which would be a cause for vitamin D deficiency. A study done, I am referring to that study, the reference is given over the area, and I have just shown the results from that article which is published, which has shown that there is no significant change due to the burqa, because even if those who use the burqa would have moderate exposure to the sunlight, which is enough to maintain optimum vitamin D level, and hence the difference in vitamin D level in burqa clad or otherwise is not significant. So that's about all that myth about the vitamin D deficiency, and practically the real need for vitamin D supplementing in the diet would be hardly in about 5% of the total prescriptions which are given now. 95% of the prescriptions are unnecessary. Moreover, there is a lot of pressure over the government, over the health policy makers, to make it mandatory to have a fortified vitamin D food supplements. Of course, in the market you will have lots of food supplements where you will have very prominent labels like it will be having a fortified vitamin D and it will be helpful for growth of the bone and so on. Lots of products are promoted in the market, commercialization. So there is a lot of issue about the commercialization of the vitamin D supplement, and as a physician we should be aware of the situation. I am not saying that you should condemn it or so on, but that kind of a fancy like a fortified diet of vitamin D is of no much clinical significance. Rather, at times it can be even harmful even. So important is about the basic dietary requirement and exposure to the sunlight, exercise. That would be enough to maintain an optimum level of vitamin D in almost every patient whom we are able to treat, except very rare conditions where there is a real deficiency, due to the economic condition of the people or so on, or a genetic pathology. Now same is with the calcium also. Now another of the supplement which is often prescribed is calcium. Very often vitamin D and calcium are co-prescribed, or the calcium is supposed to be the consequence of the vitamin D. Now certain of the factors which you should know is the maximum tolerable limits of the calcium in adults is 200 mg per day, and serum calcium levels above 12 mg per day is very critical and can be harmful, and requires supplementation only when it is less than 6 mg per 100 ml. When the calcium level is increased, it can result in a high risk of cardiac events, stones, kidney diseases. These are all well known, and even if, and the safe range of the calcium is only that much. 6 to 12 is considered as the safe range of the calcium. But now these days prescription of the calcium has become a fancy, and even the people, almost every person would be taking some amount of calcium above the age of 40, particularly females, regularly, because calcium is presented as a chewable tablet and looks like a chocolate, and there is a practice of giving this to the children also. That unnecessary calcium is definitely is not good, and it can be harmful. So there has to be a limitation about the prescription of the calcium also. The required daily allotment of the calcium dosage is according to the age it's considered as, and the maximum in case of 51 years above should not be more than 1000 milligram. This is suggested by the latest data, where necessarily the calcium is prescribed more than what's necessary. This kind of a protocol is not really an ideal protocol as such. Now that's a bit about the calcium and rickets asset. Now next of the point